So Sarah, you started talking about PIDA and the legislation within the UK. Can you tell us a bit about, what the current legislation is and how that's looking to evolve?
Yeah, absolutely. So the basic framework that applies to everybody in the UK, so all firms in the UK, is PIDA. And that requires that where somebody makes a protected disclosure, where an employee makes a protected disclosure, they're prevented from any mistreatment as a result of that disclosure. So it's fairly limited. It applies to a fairly limited scope of people. So for example, it doesn't apply to non-executive directors, it doesn't apply to suppliers or to the self-employed people that you may have as consultants within your company. And it applies after a disclosure has been made. So that is something to consider, but the question is how to effectively have people report. So we're a little bit further behind on that in the UK, and there is some limited guidance. So for financial services firms, there's actually a lot of work that has been done by the FCA, bringing in requirements under SISC, the Systems and Control section of the handbook, to make it mandatory for firms to have a whistleblowing framework in place, for them to treat whistleblowers in particular ways, so to respond to whistleblowing complaints, to be able to provide information to whistleblowers. Somebody within financial services has to be responsible for the conduct of that system, and they also have to keep good records of how people are reporting and the results of those investigations. But that is limited to the financial services sector, and it hasn't gone elsewhere. There have been slight developments elsewhere. There are people that can receive reports externally for certain sectors. So there are certainly within the environmental sector, within the charitable sector, there's a possibility of employees going to those external agencies to make their whistleblowing complaints, which is not what you want as a business. You'd like to obviously understand what's going on first and investigate, rather than the first you hear about it is from an external agency. And there's certainly a lot of guidance, again, from oversight bodies or quasi-regulatory bodies that suggest and encourage those sorts of speak up and culture of whistleblowing reporting. So your Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, your Institute of Chartered Accountants, Institute of Actuaries, all strongly encourage that their firms should have these whistleblowing protections in place. And there's also a requirement under the UK Corporate Governance Code for certain listed companies to have whistleblowing procedures in place. And I think Patrick has some experience of that.
Yes, certainly. So the UK Corporate Governance Code is a sort of quasi-regulatory obligation that is imposed upon our listed entities, such that in their annual reports they have to demonstrate either a complied or explain why you haven't complied approach to various elements of the combined code, which includes an obligation upon them to provide a facility for employees to raise their concerns, which typically your listed firm will discharge that obligation by putting in place a whistleblowing helpline. And that whistleblowing helpline or service will then assist by providing regular reports to the audit committee chair, who will then have that as an agenda item on the audit committee meetings for the year. So it's an obligation under the code, and typically your listed company will discharge that obligation through the implementation of a whistleblowing helpline or similar.
So Sarah, you mentioned that PIDA's been around about 25 years now, and you've, I suppose, highlighted some of the areas where it doesn't perhaps have the same scope of protection that some of the other areas of legislation, other countries' legislation has. There is the new bill, which is being, I think, is it a bill? I mean, there's a new proposed legislation.
Bill, yes, it's a private members' bill, so it doesn't have the support of the government, and I think we probably are aware of, there are very few private members' bills that actually make it into legislation, but I think it shows the direction of travel. Each time it comes back, it seems to have slightly more support. There's a growing sort of public interest, I think, in holding people accountable. There has been the ESG ESG has almost been a movement in and of itself, hasn't it? And I think it has been very shareholder, consumer driven. People want to see ethical, conscious, socially conscious firms. And I think as long as we continue down that path, I think the whistleblowing bill will eventually gain traction. That having been said, parts of the whistleblowing bill were sought to have been shoehorned into the recent Economic Crime Corporate Transparency Act, didn't make it. So we'll see how it goes.
So of the current things that are proposed, what do you think will become sort of adopted, whether through legislation or just generally that organisations will see the benefit of adopting them?
I would be surprised if a requirement for a broader whistleblowing framework isn't eventually included in something like there's a new economic crime bill passing. So it would be surprising if aspects of the whistleblowing legislation didn't come in through that. I think it would be surprising if the definition, the rather limited definition in PEDA isn't expanded to match the European requirements. But I don't think, who knows, I don't think that there will be a criminal offence essentially they want to take the PEDA Employment Tribunal jurisdiction of fining firms for mistreatment of whistleblowers and make that into a criminal offence. So turn that into a corporate liability, so a new corporate liability for mistreatment of whistleblowers. I'm not sure that will make it.
So it'd be interesting to see how it kind of plays out and how the wider whistleblowing sort of legislation plays out. Certainly clients that I'm speaking to with Greg tend to be just interested in looking at sort of the global picture with regards to whistleblowing legislation. We're about to come onto the EU legislation, which is driving a lot of UK businesses, despite it having not been implemented in the UK. A lot of them work within the EU anyway, or looking to what the EU legislation says. So I definitely think it'll be interesting to see how this bill does or doesn't progress. I think my view is there certainly will be enhanced legislation at some point, but some people seem to think it'll happen quickly. I'm with you, Sarah. I think it might not happen that quickly, but it won't stop people being interested in. And I think what I'm really encouraged by is our clients seem to just want to raise their sort of standards generally in this area, motivated by all of the different things that we've already discussed. So yeah, we shall watch this space and see what happens. So thank you very much for that.